I didn't even get the chance to brace myself. One moment I was upright, and the next I was weightless, flailing through the air. My hips slammed hard into the second stair before I crumpled. The world didn't blur or spin, it just jolted, then froze. I can't say for sure if he pushed me. Maybe he didn't mean to, but I know what I felt, and I remember exactly what I heard. Footsteps, then nothing, and in that stretch of silence, lying there with my back flat against the floor, it wasn't the pain that struck first. It was the remembering of not how I ended up hurt, but how I ended up there at all. The house I'd left behind wasn't perfect. The kitchen wallpaper peeled near the stove, and the back porch railing had been wobbly for years. But it held my life, the way a basket holds fruit weathered full and wholly mine. It was Jared who first floated the idea of moving in with them. He dropped by after work one Thursday, kicked off his shoes like he still lived there, and sat across from me at the table, asked how I was getting by. I told him the truth that the stairs felt steeper, and the grocery runs wore me out more than they used to. He nodded, didn't say much. A week later, he came back with a full plan. Said he and Lana had plenty of room. Said the guest bed was new. Said I wouldn't have to worry about Bill's snow or noises in the night. Just pack what I needed, only for a little while. I agreed before I gave it too much thought. Wasn't the first time I said yes, just to keep someone else happy. I packed quietly, 3 boxes, books, clothes, and a few framed pictures. The rest stayed behind, right where it had always been. I told myself this was just temporary, that my house would still be there when I came back. Jared drove me over on a rainy afternoon. Lana met us at the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and something synthetic. It was clean in the kind of way that dares you to leave fingerprints. They had made space, a drawer in the bathroom, a shelf in the hall closet. Jared carried my boxes up the stairs and left me alone to unpack. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but not in the right way. It didn't creak where it should have, didn't hum like home. Let me ask you something. Have you ever left a place that held your entire life, only to realize you'd packed more than boxes? That maybe, without meaning to, you left your voice behind too. Morning light felt different in Jared's house. No sharp sunlight cutting across the room, just a filtered haze behind heavy curtains that never seemed to open fully. Everything was beige, gray, neutral, like a catalog spread, not a place with a pulse. Lana moved with a rhythm that didn't include me. She left early in neatly pressed pants and heels, barely offering a nod as she passed the kitchen. We rarely spoke, not unkind, just absent. Jared was home most days, but he spent his time behind a closed office door. He'd bring me coffee in the morning, set it down gently, smile like someone checking a task off a list. I didn't complain. I folded towels. I read the same books twice, but the little changes, they crept in. My favorite mug disappeared after the first week. The blanket I brought from home was replaced with a thinner one. No one asked. The shelf where I kept a few things now displayed Lana's shoes. Then Jared brought up the house. It happened in the kitchen, while I was steeping tea. He leaned against the counter, arms folded, voice measured. Said it wasn't safe to leave the house sitting empty. Said break-ins were on the rise. Said insurance wouldn't cover damages if it looked like neglect. He offered to manage it, just for now. Rent it out, keep it from falling apart. Said I wouldn't have to lift a finger. Said I could keep the income. He'd handle the details. A few days later, he gave me a folder, pages already marked for signatures. He flipped through them quickly, pointing to each line. I asked a couple of questions. He brushed them off. Standard language, he said. I signed. My hand trembled slightly, but I kept my face still. Afterward, he looked relieved, told me I'd done the right thing, said he was proud of me for being practical. I nodded, but something inside me shifted. That night, I stood at the window, trying to recall the sound of my old house, the buzz of the fridge, the creak in the hallway floor. Those quiet little moments that had once been mine. But the silence here, it didn't carry memory. It carried something else, something unnamed, something slowly moving in and taking up space. It started with a letter that never came. January passed, then February, and still no property tax notice. At first, I told myself it was a mailing error. Maybe the system was delayed. But deep down, I knew better. I didn't say anything to Jared. I just watched. He seemed more relaxed than usual. Talked about work projects. Joked about Lana redecorating the living room again. He never brought up the house. And I didn't either. But I needed answers. So one morning, while Jared was out running errands, I took the bus across town. Not to the old library where people knew me, but the new branch by the Civic Center. I asked for access to the public land records terminal, sat down at the screen, and typed in my address. The page loaded: parcel ID, lot size, year built. And then I saw it. The owner wasn't me. Wasn't Jared either. It was someone named Lillian Fox. A transfer had been filed 6 weeks earlier. Paid in full. Deed recorded. Final. I sat perfectly still, letting the information land. Not a company, not a trust, just a stranger. I printed the page and folded it into my bag. Outside, the wind tugged at my coat, and I let it. I sat on a concrete bench near the bus stop, holding that sheet of paper like it weighed 20 pounds. I didn't get on the next bus. That evening, I cooked dinner in silence. Jared came home late, kissed my head like always, asked what I was reading. I lifted a magazine without looking at him. He didn't mention the house. I didn't either. But I watched everything more closely, the way Lana's smile lingered too long in the hallway, how her voice lowered on certain phone calls, the unfamiliar key fob that appeared on the hook by the door. I said nothing, made no accusations, but every night I took out that printout and reread it, over and over. I traced where my name should have been. I wasn't angry, not yet. But something inside me was rearranging. It wasn't grief. It was something colder. A silence that didn't protect me. It erased me, and I wasn't ready to be erased. I waited 3 days before doing anything. Not because I was unsure. I just needed the quiet to settle. I needed to see Jared clearly, not as the boy I raised, but as the man he had become. It was Saturday morning when I asked him to meet me out back. The garden behind the house was small, just a few raised beds and a worn metal bench under a tired-looking maple tree. I stood beside the rosemary bush, manila folder in hand. He stepped outside wearing sneakers and a hoodie, sipping from a paper cup like he had somewhere better to be. He glanced at the folder, then at me. I handed it over. No words. He flipped through the pages, scanning fast, mouth pressed tight. Then he looked up. No shock, no apology. Just that cool, practiced face he used when bad news needed dressing up. He said I misunderstood. that legal ownership sometimes shifts on paper for tax or insurance reasons. Said the house was still ours, that nothing had really changed. I didn't say a word. I just let the space stretch. That's when his tone shifted, a little sharper. Said he and Lana had been covering everything: bills, upkeep, repairs. Said I had no idea how hard it had been. Said I was living in a fantasy while they dealt with reality. Said he didn't mean to shut me out, but I was making things harder than they had to be. He didn't yell ... He spoke low, slow, reasonable. The kind of voice that's supposed to sound like kindness but feels like control. Then he said it. Said I'd always been difficult. That after Dad died, I clung to that house like it was a museum. That I was becoming a burden. That Lana had tried, really tried, to welcome me. He meant for the words to land. And they did. But not the way he hoped. They landed like a weight, deep and final. I looked him in the eyes and held it. He looked away first. Then he asked if I planned to do anything with what I knew. His voice was flat, but there was something sharp behind it. A flicker I hadn't seen before. Or maybe I had, and I just refused to name it. I told him I hadn't decided yet. He tossed the folder back on the bench, said he had a meeting in an hour and walked away. No apology, no hesitation. Lana didn't come outside, but I saw her through the kitchen window, rinsing a glass at the sink. She never looked up. She'd heard everything. Some silences are louder than any scream. Hers was one of them. I stood there in the garden, alone with the folder. The corner was creased where he'd gripped it. But the truth inside hadn't changed. They knew what they'd done, and now, so did I. After that morning in the garden, things didn't explode. There were no slammed doors, no shouting matches, just little shifts, quiet ones. The kind that slip in like fog until you can't remember how things used to feel. I noticed it first in the kitchen. The mug I always used, the one with the faded blue rim, disappeared. I asked Lana if she'd seen it. She said no, eyes blank. The next day, a plain white mug appeared on the shelf in its place. No story, no soul. Then the photo I'd kept in the hallway vanished. A picture of Jared as a toddler, standing in the old backyard in his red rain boots. I found it days later, shoved face down in a bottom drawer of the linen cabinet. No frame, slightly bent. My books were boxed and pushed into the guest room closet. Their old shelf now held decorative bowls and a reed diffuser. Nothing was said, and that's what made it worse. Because it meant everything was intentional. The guest room changed, too. Lana swapped out the quilt I brought for a thinner one in a color that didn't suit me. A lavender candle, still wrapped in plastic, sat on the knitstand. It smelled like nothing I knew. The one I brought gone. One afternoon I opened the closet and found my coat buried behind Lana's dresses. My walking shoes had disappeared. In their place were boxes labeled storage. I kept telling myself maybe they just needed space, that it wasn't personal, but the pattern was too clear. This wasn't about stuff. It was about presence. And mine was being erased, piece by piece. I looked at myself in the mirror one morning. My jawline had softened. The lines around my mouth had deepened. I looked like someone who had been slowly disappearing without even realizing it. And the house was starting to reflect that. The role I had always played, mother, memory keeper, anchor, was being boxed up like the rest of my things. Jared avoided me when he could. Lana kept herself busy. Their lives moved around me like I was furniture, useful, silent, out of the way. I stopped asking about the house. I stopped checking the mail. I stopped waiting for answers that wouldn't come, but I paid attention. The distance between us wasn't a crack anymore. It was a canyon. And I'd stopped pretending I could build a bridge across it. I wasn't trying to dig. I only wanted to find one of those old birthday cards Jared made when he was little. Drawn in crayon, folded crooked, usually with misspelled words and a smiley sun in the corner. But the filing cabinet didn't hold memories anymore. It held something else. Tucked in the back was a thin, unlabeled folder wedged between appliance manuals. Inside were copies of documents, deed transfers, a blank check with my name, and a signature that didn't quite look like mine. I sat down right there on the carpet, folder open across my lap, my chest tightening. The dates didn't match anything I remembered. One form listed a phone number with an out-of-state area code. It was like looking at a version of my life that someone else had quietly rearranged. Then the door opened behind me. Jared stood in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the papers in my lap. For a long second, we didn't speak. Then he said, calm and flat, that I shouldn't be going through things. Said I didn't understand what I was looking at. Said it was all legal, that I needed to calm down. I stood up slowly, still holding the folder. He stepped closer. I don't know if it was the way he moved or how fast he did it, but I backed away. My foot caught on the edge of the rug. My heel snagged the stair molding. It was a tiny shift, but it was enough. My body tilted. The folder flew from my hands. My arms swung out, searching for anything to grab. And then nothing. Just light and pain, and the sound of my breath leaving me all at once. When I came to, I was at the bottom of the stairs, flat on my back. Pain radiated from my right side. My shoulder felt twisted, like it didn't belong to me. The overhead light flickered. I could hear the refrigerator humming beyond the kitchen door. Jared was gone. No footsteps, no voice, just the low murmur of a house going on like I hadn't been part of it. I must have passed out again. Because the next time I opened my eyes, there were strangers around me. A paramedic shining a flashlight into my eyes. Someone asking my name. I tried to say it, but the sound barely came. They said Jared had called 911. Told them I had fallen. They asked if I had a history of dizziness. I couldn't answer. At the hospital, they rolled me into a bay off the hallway, curtain half drawn. Scans confirmed a broken collarbone and heavy bruising across my ribs. A nurse brought water in a paper cup, along with the kind of pills that make everything feel far away. Later that night, the same nurse returned. Her name was Janelle. She had soft eyes. Said I'd be staying overnight. Said Jared had filled out the intake forms and left before the doctor finished. I asked if he'd said anything else. She paused, then shook her head. And that was it. Not like I had fallen, like I'd been left. They moved me to a small room in the back corner of the ward. The window looked out over the parking lot. The walls were a pale green that seemed to drain the color from everything. My right arm was in a sling. Every shift reminded me how far I'd fallen, and how much I couldn't undo. The pain meds softened the edges, but they couldn't touch the memory. I kept seeing Jared's face in the doorway, cold, blank, like I was a mess to manage, not a mother to care for. It was Janelle who noticed. She came in to check vitals and lingered longer than she needed to. Her eyes swept across the bruises blooming on my ribs. She didn't ask directly, just asked softly, gently, enough that I didn't have to lie, but didn't have to speak either. She made a note in my chart and stepped out. The next afternoon, a woman appeared. Plain navy slacks, soft cardigan, lanyard around her neck. She introduced herself as Patrice. Said she worked in elder care services. Explained she was part of a review team when there were concerns about safety or financial exploitation. She didn't push, didn't prod. She pulled up a chair and simply waited. I told her I was fine, said it was just a fall. Said Jared had called the ambulance and handled the forms. She nodded. Didn't write a thing. Then she asked if anyone else had access to my finances, if I'd signed anything recently, if I was still getting mail from my home. I froze. Not because I didn't know the answers, but because I did. I said I used to own a house. I said I wasn't sure if I still did. Patrice didn't tell me I was wrong, didn't warn me to be careful. She just asked if I'd be open to talking with someone about what comes next. Later that evening, after dinner trays had been cleared and the hallway grew quiet, I stared out through the curtain slit. Across the hall, a man sat upright in bed, surrounded by daughters. They brought him soup and a blanket from home. One of them fed him slowly, hand steady. They laughed. Soft, familiar laughter. I turned away, back to the ceiling, back to my thoughts. I used to have Jared. The boy who cried when I forgot his lunchbox. The boy who tugged on my coat sleeve at the grocery store. That boy was gone, replaced by a man I no longer recognized. But I wasn't alone in the way I used to be. Loneliness had changed shape. Now it came with names like Patrice. With questions that didn't demand answers. With a stillness that didn't feel empty, just unfinished. 2 mornings after Patrice's visit, I asked Chanel if I could borrow a phone. Not to call Jared. There was nothing left to say to him. My hand shook a little as I dialed a number I hadn't used in years but never forgot. Carla answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice still carried that clipped confidence I remembered. We hadn't spoken since she'd retired from her law practice and moved out to her sister's land. I told her I was in the hospital, told her something had happened with Jared, told her I needed help. She didn't ask for details. Just said she'd be there by noon, and she was. She walked into that room with a small legal pad and a pen already in hand. Her gray hair was pulled back in a low knot. Her coat looked like she'd grabbed it off a hook on her way out the door. She didn't hug me. Wasn't her style. She sat down beside the bed and waited. I told her everything: the house, the paperwork, the drawer, the fall. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she turned to a clean page and started writing. First, she asked for the property address. Then dates any I could remember tied to documents I'd signed. She asked about notaries, account numbers, if I'd ever seen Jared mail anything for me. Every question lit up a dark hallway in my mind. I remembered signing a form about managing the house, not ownership. I remembered Jared rushing me. I remembered not getting a copy. I remembered his voice saying, "It's nothing to worry about." Carla frowned when I said that. She told me forged signatures were more common than anyone liked to admit. That financial abuse of the elderly often slipped right under everyone's noses. But there were laws. We weren't powerless. She said the first thing we'd do was look at the signature. From her bag, she pulled a manila envelope. Inside was a scanned copy of the property transfer Jared had filed. She had pulled it from the public records website before she ever stepped into the hospital. She placed it on the tray table, handed me a pen, asked me to sign my name the way I had on my driver's license. I did. Then she held up the filed document. The signature was close, but it wasn't mine. The angle of the way the D curled. Someone had copied it. Sloppily, Carla tapped the edge of the page with her pen. Her eyes didn't leave mine. "This," she said, "is where we start." That night, lying in that pale green room with the beeping monitors and soft hallway light, I felt something shift. Not quite hope, but alignment, like the floor beneath me had finally stopped tilting. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own life. I felt like someone coming back into focus. By the following Tuesday, Carla had already made 3 phone calls, filed 2 formal records requests, and pulled my credit history for the last 2 years. She showed up at the hospital just after visiting hours ended, holding a folder that looked too heavy for its size. She didn't sit. She stood at the foot of my bed and told me the truth, plain, direct. Jared had used my name to secure a business loan 6 months ago. A line of credit with a private lender based in Nevada. He'd used the house as collateral, the same house he quietly transferred to someone named Lillian Fox. The money from the sale never touched any joint accounts. It went straight into a bank account under Lana's name. Not shared, not for the household, just hers. The business deal collapsed. There was no company, no launch. Just a trail of carefully filed documents pointing back to me as the original owner of the property. If Carla hadn't known exactly where to look, no one would have noticed until it was far too late. The fraud wasn't messy. It was layered, calculated. She showed me deposit slips, transfers just under the reporting limit, transactions labeled as reimbursements. It wasn't clumsy. It was deliberate. I didn't ask how Jared had figured out how to do all this. I didn't want to know. Carla had already contacted Patrice. The 2 of them worked well together, steady, unshaken. Patrice had submitted a formal report to the county's Elder Protection Unit. Carla was drafting a complaint to the State Financial Crimes Bureau. It would take time. I asked about the house. Carla said there was still a path forward, since the deed was obtained under fraudulent pretenses and the signature clearly forged. We could petition to have the transfer voided. If the notary proved to be fake, the sale could be reversed, but it depended on timing and what the beer knew or didn't know. There were still questions about the lender, still shadows in the story. But for the first time since I hit that floor, I didn't feel like I was falling anymore. I felt anchored. Later that afternoon, Carla stepped into the hallway to speak with the staff about my discharge. I sat by the window and looked out over the parking lot. Light snow drifted sideways in the wind. I thought about Jared, how his voice used to sound when he called me Mom. How long it had been since I'd heard it without impatience in it. I thought about Lana, too. How she moved through that house like I was a misplaced object, something Jared should have left behind. But I was done being misplaced, and I was done being silent. With Carla and Patrice beside me, I wasn't invisible anymore. I was seen, and that for now was enough. I left the hospital 2 days earlier than expected. Carla arranged for a driver to take me to a small temporary apartment near the city center. It wasn't much, but it was clean, a kitchenette, a firm bed, a window that caught the afternoon light just right. Patrice called once a day to check in. The rest of the time, I sat with the folder going over every page Carla had gathered. On the 3rd day, I asked Carla for a favor. I wanted to talk to Lana alone. Jared was out of town, supposedly meeting with someone about refinancing a project that didn't exist. It was the only window I'd get. Lana didn't know I was coming. I showed up at their door with my arm still in a sling. She opened it just wide enough to see me, then stepped aside without a word. The house smelled like lemon cleaner, same as always, sterile, cold. She offered me tea, then poured herself a cup and left me to sit at the dining table. Her eyes flicked to my shoulder, then looked away. I told her I knew about the house, about the loan, about where the money had gone. She didn't flinch, just lifted her cup and took a slow sip. Then she spoke, said Jared had tried to fix things, said I made it harder by asking questions, said maybe I didn't understand how much pressure we'd put on him. Her voice was smooth to smooth, practice ... Then she said it. She said the account had to be in her name because mine would have triggered red flags. That the lender was already asking too many questions. That Jared said it'd be easier if the sale looked clean, like it had passed through a third party. Then she looked at me, almost daring me to react. I didn't. In my coat pocket, my phone recorded everything. Carla had shown me how to set it up, one button, audio only. Legal in this state as long as one person consents. I let Lana finish her tea, then I stood up. She didn't ask where I was going. I said thank you before I left, not because she deserved it, but because I needed that moment to end quietly. Outside, the air was cold and dry, the sky the color of worn concrete. I walked 2 blocks and sat on a bench near the library, called Carla, told her we had what we needed. That night, I emailed the recording to Patrice. No threats, no commentary. Just Lana's voice, steady and clear, saying what no one else had been able to prove. The pieces were starting to fall into place, not because I yelled, not because I fought, but because I listened, because I waited, because I refused to be erased. The meeting was held in a small downtown office. Beige carpet, stiff chairs in a circle. Carla was already there when it began, seated at the head of the table. Across from her sat Jared and Lana. Also present a representative from the title company, an attorney from the county, and a quiet assistant from the district's elder fraud task force. I wasn't there. That had been the plan from the beginning. I didn't need to sit across from Jared again. Didn't need to see Lana's expressionless face or hear their rehearsed excuses. Carla would speak for me. That was enough. In the center of the table was a folder. Inside a signed affidavit, the evidence from Patrice, the audio recording, and a notarized letter from me. The letter revoked every legal and financial permission I had ever given Jared. Carla read her statement clearly. No anger, no theatrics, just the truth. Jared had taken advantage of someone vulnerable. Lana had knowingly participated. The money had been funneled into private accounts. The house was sold with a forged signature. The sale was now under investigation, and the lender had already agreed to pause collections while that investigation continued. Then Carla presented a new document. A revised will, signed a week earlier. She opened the envelope and placed it on the table. Read one paragraph aloud. Every inheritance previously designated to Jared Michael Dobbins was revoked. My remaining assets, including restitution from the fraud case, would go into a trust named after my late husband. The trust would support elderly women who had experienced financial abuse by family members. No drama followed, no raised voices. Just the quiet hum of the sea and the sound of one page turning. Jared didn't speak. Lana folded her arms. No one stood. When it ended, Carla stepped outside and sent me a text. 3 words. It's done. I sat in the window of my small apartment, looking down at the street. A boy passed by, holding his grandmother's hand. They laughed at something I couldn't hear. I didn't cry. The grief I carried had already changed into something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but freedom. Not the kind you fight for, the kind you step into when the door finally opens. And I had walked through it, without looking back. I moved into the new place just as the first leaves started to fall. It was a small apartment above a senior resource center, part of a nonprofit housing program Patrice had connected me with. Nothing fancy. One bedroom, a little balcony, and just enough sunlight to keep my rosemary plant alive. I furnished it slowly, a second-hand chair from the thrift shop, a bookshelf I built myself, one shaky shelf at a time. I brought the photo of Jared in his red boots, taped it back into its old frame, and placed it on the windowsill. It stayed there, not as a reminder of him, but as a reminder of the woman who once carried that boy through every storm and scraped knee. There were no phone calls from Jared, no letters, no apologies. But the silence felt different now. It wasn't hollow, it was spacious, room to breathe, room to stretch. Most mornings, I made coffee and sat on the balcony with a blanket over my lap. People walked by below on their way to the center. Some waved, some didn't. I liked both kinds. One morning, while watering the rosemary, I spotted a familiar figure walking toward the park. It was Janelle. She didn't see me at first. But when she did, her smile was warm and real. We didn't say anything, just nodded. It was enough. Later that afternoon, I walked through the park. The trees had turned, their leaves rust-colored and brittle underfoot. I passed families, couples, a woman walking a dog in a pink sweater. No one knew who I was, and that felt safe. By the fountain, I stopped and sat on a bench. I had lived through betrayal, through loss, through the quiet, steady disappearance of the person I thought I was. But I had also lived through the return. Piece by piece, I reclaimed my voice, not with rage, with clarity, with silence that held weight. I didn't need to be seen to matter. I had seen myself. And that, after everything, was the beginning of a life I could finally call my own.